Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Casey, your hair isn't normally that curly. Is
I'm
it?
sorry, what you saying, Miss Mary?
Your hair isn't normally that curly. Is it?
Oh, no. No, I tried something new.
It's pretty.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let's give a few more people, give a minute or two longer to see if we get more people here first. Any questions or concerns? One thing, I sent out an email the other night with the deadlines, the due dates, and I'm gonna start doing that every week. It's been suggested to me before, and I've just never, I haven't done it yet. But by one of my students, it was actually someone in this class, and I don't think he's here yet. But I just haven't done it yet, but I'm doing it now. And I will try to do it every week. I'll try to give you those deadlines. But I missed one. And I got an email the other night about it, and I'll show it to you right now. The case study. So your first case study is out there, and it's posted. And it is, bear with me here. It is right here. As I get there. I think I told you that for the students who had me for lab last semester for Biology 121, their case studies were a lot more involved, and I'm realizing they were overly involved. And so I'm making them a little easier this semester. But let me show you this one. And I think I mentioned this at the very end of last week, that next semester, I like case studies. Some students hate case studies. Other students love case studies. I like them because it gives you a chance to actually apply what you're learning to a real case scenario. And so, but I'm also trying to make them a little easier than what I've made them before. And so bear with me here. Coming into content. You come down, case studies, it's right here. And this was also the due date I missed on that email. Let's make it due. Since I missed it for this last email, I'm putting it off a week. And I'm trying to remember what I told the student last night. I think I told her the 17th. So it gives you 2 weeks. I'm gonna click on it. Yep, maybe. Oh, it's. So honeymoon havoc, a heart physiology case study. So newlyweds Julian and Tanya Brahim were on a long flight to Australia for their honeymoon. Mr. Brahim looked out the small window of the plane and gazed at the ocean below. He was afraid of flying, and the sight of the water so far below him made his heart beat wildly. He commented on his rapid heartbeat to Tanya. She was a nursing student and had just covered a cardiac physiology course last semester. She excitedly explained to her husband that the heart was a unique that the heart has a unique conduction system involving two types of cells, myocardial cells, contractile and arrhythmic cells. Both of these types of cells are critical for proper heart contraction and relaxation, and both rely on the separation of ions across their membranes to make an electrochemical gradient. You remember this coming back to you from when we talked about heart physiology and this depolarization, repolarization of the atria and the ventricles.
Yes.
Use the following words below to fill in the blanks that Tanya used to describe the heart. The words may be used once, more than once, or not at all in this paragraph. And then Tanya was now on a roll and excited to continue the discussion of heart cell physiology. She grabbed an airplane napkin to draw a picture of the heart action potentials for Julian. Draw a picture, and I'm giving you the graph here. Draw a graph depicting a typical action potential of an autorhythmic cell. Make sure to include a label and units for the X and Y axis, the resting potential, the threshold potential, and make sure the graphs are drawn representative of actual values. Now write out a description of ion movement. So when sodium moving into the cell, calcium moving into the cell, when is potassium moving into the cell? Describe what happens in words, then add ion types and movement in and out of the graph, out on the graph you drew. Use the provided figure to recreate her, let's see here, use the provided figure, bottom of next page, you don't have a figure. But draw the standard, I honestly, from the site that I got this, they didn't have a figure either. But use to recreate her napkin image. So supposedly there was a figure of a napkin image. You don't need that. Because what you're going to do is draw a standard action potential of a myocardial contractile cell. Make sure to include the label and units for the X and Y axes, the resting potential, the threshold potential, and make sure all values are drawn representative of actual values. And then last question, write out a description of the ion movement and channel opening and closing that are responsible for the above graph in myocardial contractile cells. Describe what happens in words, and then add ion types and movements in and out of the graph you drew. You guys, if you think this is harder than the one that we did in class, and I love to see cameras on. If you're willing to do it, I'd love to see it. I see one, but I'd love to see more, just so I don't feel like I'm talking to myself here. If you think this is harder, it's not. Because what I want you to do is come in to, bear with me here. What I want you to do is come in and look at the heart physiology PowerPoint again. So I'm coming in here. You can also use those videos down below. You can reuse whatever is whatever is in your possession. This isn't an exam. So if you want to discuss it with others of the class, please do it. But I guess we don't really have to worry about it. If you get any answers from somewhere like a website or something, you need to provide a citation. And whatever, if you get the answer from there, you need to put it in your own words. If you find a paragraph about the influx of the ions in and out of the membrane, feel free to use it. I just want you to re-describe it in your own words. So bear with me here. You can probably find a chapter or a paragraph in your book describing all the words and how the ions move in and out also. But do not write it word for word from the book. I will know. I will figure it out really quickly because all I have to do is go to the book. Don't do that. Do us both a favor and don't do that. Because I really want to know what you know. So coming here, a little further up. Here's one picture of the contractile cell membrane potential. Here's the other picture. Write this out in your own words. This gives you that answer. Do you see what I'm saying? For your next two case studies, I'm not going to show you where you can find the answers for all of them, but for this first one, let me show you where you can find the answers. Here's the action potential for the pacemaker cells. Are there any questions? So submit this in the Dropbox by March 17th. I don't think it's going to take you very long. I don't expect it to take you more than an hour and a half at most. When you submit it, I'll put a folder in the Dropbox on D2L. I wanted to make a case study that was easier than the ones that we discussed in lab. And I think that, the fact that I've just shown you where the answers are and we've gone over it, it should be an easier project for you. But you're going to submit it in the Dropbox Actually, I have a Dropbox open for it. I didn't realize that. And someone's already submitted one. When you submit it, like we did with the case studies before, make sure that you submit it with, bear with me here. Make sure it's submitted as a JPEG, a Word document. It's coming to you as a Word document. So you can insert it right into that Word document if you want. You can take a picture of a graph, make sure it's clear, and insert it into that Word document if you want to. But submit it, but it needs to be legible. If you're going to handwrite that graph, which you can do, which is probably the easiest way to do that, I still need it to be legible. But submit it as either a JPEG, a PDF, or a Word document. And submit it by the 17th. Are there any questions?
Yes, Professor, please, how are we going to go about the graph?
Okay. What's your question?
Like, how are we going to do it?
You're gonna, you can draw it.
The one you showed us now, right?
Yes.
So copying and pasting an image is not acceptable. You want us
Do
to
you
draw
mean,
it?
No, you
do
can
you
copy.
mean we can?
Wait, let me bear with me, Claire. Yeah, you can copy and paste the image. I just need it to be legible.
Okay, okay,
I
we
mean,
can scan it and then upload it to Dropbox, right?
Yes.
Okay.
we can
Yes.
copy it from a picture on the internet as long as we cite it.
You can. I would prefer you draw it, but I realize that some people don't have the internet issues to do that. You can do that also, but you do need to have a good paragraph in there, your own words describing the ions moving in and out.
Understood.
You'll learn more if you can do it by hand. You'll remember a lot more, I promise. But it doesn't, but either way is fine. Any other questions about it? Let's get started on today's class. I want to finish the heart. We need to finish the heart today and start into the blood vessels. Yeah, I don't even care if you handwrite in the answers and submit them as a JPEG for that case study. Just make sure that they're legible enough that I can read them and grade them. So we were on slide 84. I want to back up just a little bit. Actually, let's put this over here. So mechanical events of the heart. Right after the heart has the ventricles have ejected all the blood, the ventricles start to relax. And at this moment, all of the blood from the ventricles has now been pushed in. Remember, think of the blood as like any other fluid, any other liquid. It's easier to think of it as water because that's the one we're most familiar with. The blood has right now, at this moment, been ejected. It's been, the ventricles have just contracted. The the semilunar valves got pushed open, and the blood moved out into the pulmonary trunk and into the aortic arch. And then the ventricles start to relax. And at this moment, when the ventricles start to relax, the blood that's moved out into the pulmonary trunk and the aortic arch starts to try to flow back. Remember, it's just like any other liquid. So you push it out, and then you relax those ventricles, and all of a sudden there's a drop in. If you relax the ventricles, they start to expand in volume. They are now, where's the pressure gradient? Where's the pressure the greatest? And where's it the lowest? It's going to be the lowest in the ventricles. So at this moment, the blood starts trying to flow back from the aorta, back from the pulmonary trunk. And it fills up the cusps of the semilunar valves and closes them. That's when you hear the second heart sound. And so at this moment in this isovolumetric, because there's no volume change occurring with the blood, there's no blood. All 4 sets of valves are closed. And there's no blood entering or exiting the ventricles. Then, once the pressure in the ventricles, once the pressure in the ventricles is less than that in the atria, or the pressure in the ventricles exceeds, the pressure in the atria exceeds that of the ventricles, the blood is going to flow. Those cusps, the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve are going to open, and the blood is going to flow into the ventricles. Just like any other fluid at that point, because the pressure is dropping in here, these valves are going to open. And the atria are not contracting at this point. It's just water flowing down a valve. Remember that the biggest component of blood is water. So it acts like a water or a fluid. So the blood is flowing down the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve. Semilunar valves are still closed. And there's no atrial contraction or ventricular contraction right here. For a few minutes, few seconds, or less than that, somewhere in there, milliseconds. And then the atria contract. Just an extra push. Most of the blood is just going to go in there by the ventricles, just because gravity flows. See, blood flows with gravity. And there's just a final squeeze of the ventricles to just give it a little extra oomph, and a little bit more fluid, little bit more blood moves into the ventricles. That's when the atria contract. Is just after you've had a couple milliseconds to fill, then the atria are going to contract. After the atria contract, the ventricles are going to contract. And so the pressure is going to start building up in the ventricles. This is an isovolumetric because when the ventricles start to contract, it's going to start pushing up against the bicuspid and tricuspid valves, the blood, and it's going to close those valves. This is when you hear the first heart sound. Remember that? So that, and then there's no blood entering or exiting the ventricles, but they are contracting. So the same volume of blood, but they're contracting. That's why this is an isovolumetric ventricular contraction. And then the pressure in the ventricles exceeds that of the arteries, the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, and the semilunar valves open. And the blood moves out of them. We start all over again right here. Is this clear?
Yes.
Okay. So summary showing the opening and closing of the valves and those 5 phases, or 5 different parts. 4 phases, 5 different parts. And remember that diastole is a heart relaxing. Diastole is, oh, and systole is contracted. So during isovolumetric contraction, the pressure in the ventricles does what?
Does it relax?
They-
Oh, rise rapidly.
I think you're right. Do we agree with her?
Yes.
Which,
Yes.
which of the following is the correct sequence of events of the cardiac cycle? They all start with ventricle filling, ventricular filling. So what's the next one after ventricular filling?
The isomovolic, whatever, I can't say it this early, contraction.
Okay. What's after that?
Ejection.
Ejection, and what's after that?
The relaxation.
So it's E, right?
Yeah.
So moving forward a little bit more, and we're moving in, we're gonna discuss a big diagram, but when you break it down into its pieces, it's not as overwhelming as it looks. So we're moving into it right here. It's called the Wiggers diagram. This is part of it. So what this graph is showing is the pressure in the ventricles with the EKG and the heart sounds. So time is on the x-axis, pressure in the ventricle is on the y-axis, the EKG is below, and the heart sounds. So this is systole, and then diastole. Systole, that intraventricular pressure is rising, just like Becky said a second ago. And it's rising rapidly. And then the intraventricular pressure falls as the blood starts moving out, right? Once the blood starts leaving and moving into the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, the pressure is going to drop. Well, the ventricles contract right after, almost immediately or simultaneously, right in the middle of the QRS wave of the ECG, because remember, that's the depolarization of the ventricles. And right as the ventricles start to contract, the blood starts moving up against the AV valves and closes them. These ones right here. And then the pressure in the ventricles exceeds that of the arteries, and it starts to drop because the blood is now moving into the arteries because the semilunar valves open. And then the heart relaxes and the semilunar valves close because the blood starts trying to move back into the ventricles. Just remember, these valves are there to prevent backflow and keep things moving in one direction. And then the semilunar valves close and you get the second sound right at the same time that we get repolarization of the ventricles. Are there questions about this?
No.
So this part of the graph, this is showing the top part of the graph overlaid with the aortic pressure and the pressure in the atrius with the heart sounds. So this part of the graph is right here. This part of the graph where the valves close is right here. This heart sound where the semilunar valves close is right here. So the aortic pressure is going down as the blood is moving away from the aorta. And let me say one thing. This graph is only showing for the left ventricle, the left side of the heart. So it's showing the left atria, the left ventricle, and the aorta. So looking here, the ventricle, the pressure is going up. We're in systole. And the pressure in the aorta is dropping. And so now the pressure in the ventricles exceeds that. When it exceeds that of the aorta, the semilunar valves open. And the blood starts moving into the aorta. And when the blood starts moving into the aorta, the pressure in the aorta goes up. And it goes up and up until, it keeps going up until the pressure in the aorta will then, the blood will start trying to move back. And this little notch right here is called the dichrotic notch. Let me just the dichrotic notch. Because when the blood starts to flow back in the aorta, there's a small pressure drop. You imagine this blood, it goes up into the aorta, and then it, just as now the pressure in the ventricles is now less than that of the aorta, so the blood tries to go back and it pushes on those valves, pushes on the valves. And there's just a little tiny momentarily pressure drop right there when the blood tries to move back and those valves close. That's a dichrotic notch. And the AV valves open right after that. Questions about this? So now this is the more daunting graph, and it gets just a little bit more daunting than this, but you guys, it's the same thing with one thing added. It's the same thing you just saw right here. Here's your ECG. Here's the graph of those pressures. With this added, which is just showing how the volume of the blood in the ventricles. Everyone always looks at this graph the first time and goes, oh geez. But recognize that it's multiple processes being put on the same graph. This is a world famous graph of heart physiology in the cardiac cycle. So you're going to see it in every textbook about heart physiology. And that's why we're going through it here. And it does explain how the ECG, how the heart sounds, and how the pressures are all happening. These pressure changes are all happening simultaneously. Let's talk about this one in the center here. So this is end diastolic volume. So this is the end of diastole in the ventricles. Remember, we're just looking at the left side of the heart. And specifically, a lot of it is the left ventricle. So end diastole is the end volume of how much blood is going to move into the ventricles. Bear with me. How much blood is going to move into the ventricles at this end time? When the atria have contracted and closed the valves. Right here. This is what we're looking at, is this volume right here at the end of diastole. Is how much blood after the atria have contracted, after the ventricles have had a chance to fill, how much blood is in that ventricle? That's the end diastolic volume. And typically, it's about 60 to 70 ml. At the the end systolic volume is how much blood is left in the ventricles after the ventricles have contracted and pushed a lot of the blood into the arteries, pulmonary truncae and aorta. So end diastolic, how much blood is in the ventricles at the end of the heart relaxing. And right when isovolumetric contraction begins. And the end systolic is how much blood is left in the ventricles after the ventricles have, after the ventricles have contracted completely. And now the semilunar valve closes. Is this clear how this works? So this is that world famous diagram that everybody loves. It's just showing these figures on top of one another and everything together with the ventricular filling, isovolumetric contraction, ventricular ejection, and isovolumetric relaxation. It also includes a third heart sound, which sometimes you can hear. There's different theories about what's creating that third heart sound. But one is that it's blood moving in and hitting the trabeculae carnae of the left ventricle's heart wall. Does this make sense?
It's a lot, but yes.
Yeah, it is a lot. It is a lot. It's even a lot for me. But spend some time with it and compare it up against this, where the valves are opening and closing. By far, that's probably the most complex part of heart physiology right there. Good job. So when the left ventricle contracts, the blank valve opens and the blank valve is pushed, the blank valve closes and the blank valve is pushed open on the left side of the heart.
D?
D?
Yeah, like for dog.
Yep. Do we think she's right, Lauren? Or that was Jade. Jade, do we think she's right, guys?
Yes.
Okay. This is one you're going to have to think back about. I realized I probably should have put it somewhere else once I saw this last night, but oh well. Chordae tendineae of the AV valves are anchored to what of the ventricles? This is an anatomy question. What is it?
A.
All right, Rachel, how did you know that?
I was gonna say that too. I don't know, it just sounded right.
You guys are right. You're right. Good job. I thought we were going to have to go back and look at the slide, but you're right. Good job. The opening and closing of the heart valves is caused by what?
C.
Say it one more time.
C is in cat.
Why do you think that's the case?
Because of the pressure and or like the pressure and the sounds of the contracting and relaxing of the valves.
You think it's C as in cat, or could it be another answer that's better?
Well, then I would say E.
It's E. Good job, Martin. So pressure gradients. This is a little bit more difficult, you got to think about it for a minute. In which of the following situations would the aortic pressure be higher than the ventricular, aortic pressure would be higher than the ventricular pressure. And the ventricular pressure would be higher than the atrial pressure. So at what point is the aortic pressure the highest of the three different pressures and the atrial pressure the least?
B.
D as B is in Bravo or D is in Delta?
B is in Becky.
I thought B too.
I'm just looking at the graph and it just looks like that would make sense, but
B is in,
oh, when the aortic valve opens, so A.
when with A?
D.
It's D.
I say D.
You know what? And what was sad is I put these questions in here like, oh, I don't know, a week and a half ago. And I had to go back. I was rechecking the answers last night so that I could act like I knew everything sometimes. And I couldn't find this one. I want to say, and that wasn't what I thought the answer was, but I think you guys are right. Because it's the aortic valve. It's not A. Because the pressure is the greatest in the aorta. Pressure, the AV valves close. When they're open, when the AV valve is closed, then the pressure is the highest in the atria, right?
Yes.
And when the AV valves close, the pressure is, let's see, AV valves close. The pressure is the lowest in the atria. Or is it when the heart's in diastole?
I think it's D.
I think it's D as in Delta. Because that's when the blood is going to want to start moving. Actually, no, it's not. Okay, see, this is where this is why I kept thinking it was like 1 in the morning last night, and I kept thinking to myself that it was D, but now I think it is D. I think it's C.
Me too.
It sounded really great at 1 in the morning, but I don't think that's the right answer. I think it's C because that's when the pressure would be the least in the atria, right? Because the blood is going to be trying to flow into the ventricles. Sorry, it's going to try to flow into the atria. And the semilunar valves are closed. I think it's C. And like I said, because I couldn't find that question in my pool of questions that I give you, so you probably may or may never see that one again. But it's a really good question, but I think it's C. Does that sound okay to everyone?
I'm not understanding how it's C when you look at that graph. Like if you go back and look at the graph, it doesn't make sense.
That's where I was
All right, let me
confused
look.
because I'm looking at
Like
the
right
graph.
there, where it's always showing the aortic pressure higher than any of the other ones.
This is the end of diastole. It's the beginning of systole. Or let's see here. Beginning of systole. Atrial pressure. So the aortic pressure is the highest. Semilunar valve. If the pressure, so the pressure here is the highest in the aorta, right? Rachel?
Right, right.
Pressure is the highest in the aorta. Pressure is second highest in the ventricles, right?
Right.
And it's the least
Lowest.
highest in the atria, right?
Got it.
So why is that answer not correct when the atrial pressure is the least of the bunch? Right here.
So you're saying C when their valves are
I think
closed.
it's C. Because that's this notch right here.
Okay.
Oh, I was interpreting it. Yeah, the highest. So
It's I think one of the more complicated multiple choice questions. And I'm like, Mary, why did you pick that one? But don't say anything. Of all the questions. But that's the answer. I'm looking at that diagram. Isovolumetric contraction is going to occur during the blank of the electrocardiogram. So isovolumetric contraction. It's occurring right here. So this is occurring right there. So it's in the R wave. Are there questions about this? Spend when you're studying the cardiac cycle, spend the most amount of time with that diagram right here. So let's move into something a little easier here. Cardiac output. Do you remember what this was from lab like 2 weeks ago? I think one of your questions in your lab exercise last week addressed it also. Someone define cardiac output for me, or you can read the top part of this slide. It's the amount of blood pumped by each ventricle in 1 minute. And it is determined by multiplying the heart rate by the stroke volume. The heart rate is the number of heartbeats per minute, and the stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped out with each heart contraction or each beat. And the cardiac output, because it's the amount of blood, the volume of blood being pumped out of the ventricle in 1 minute, it's going to have the units of milliliters over minutes. I'm going to stop sharing just for a sec. So erase this. Let's say that I'm going to go to the people who are here. Give me 1 second. Let's say, who have I not called on in a while? There's a lot of people I haven't called on in a while. Let's say that Kayla has a stroke volume of she has a stroke volume of stroke volume of 72 ml, 72 milliliters. So this is how much blood is pumped out of each ventricle per minute. And Kayla's heart rate is, let's say she hasn't had too much caffeine. It's not, let's pretend it's not 8 in the morning, so she's not completely caffeinated. It's more like 4 in the afternoon. She's just finished work. She's walking out, driving home, listening to her favorite song, which of course is a song she likes classical, because classical tends to make her calmer. She's not like me where she gets in her car and listens to Pearl Jam on the way home, but she likes classical. And so her heartbeats are, let's say, 75. Oh, and of course it's on time. 75 beats per minute. Okay. Now, cardiac output is heart rate times stroke volume. 75 beats per minute. Actually, we're going to take this off. Bear with me here. Times $72 ml, because that's her stroke volume. And then, because we know that heart rate has units of beats per minute, and come over here. That's not what I wanted. Pretend there's a line underneath here. We're going to say MIN. And now I'm going to draw that line actually. Oh, stop. Right there. Okay. Oh, we forgot one more unit here. this right here is stroke volume is 72 ml per beat. So per contraction. Right? You gotta love the whiteboard kindergarten writing beats. Okay. Right? So then cross cancel out beats.
Excuse me, Katie's in the waiting room.
Katie's in the waiting room. Why don't I even see her there? Just a sec. Give me a second. Oh, there she is. See, it was behind that. I don't see her in there. There they are. Thank you for saying something. So 72 times 75 is what?
5,400.
5,400. So what that means is that Kayla's cardiac output is 5,400. Was that right? Someone say yes or no. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Of course. All right. 5,400 ml per minute. That's her cardiac output. It's the same for the right and left side of the heart. So it's the same for the right ventricle. It's the same for the left ventricle per minute. Any questions about this?
I just want to make sure I got this right. So you said the stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped by the atrioventricular valve,
Pumped by the left ventricle.
left ventricle. Okay, thank you.
Actually, say it one more time. I'm sorry, Zena. Say it one more time just to make sure that I got you right.
So you said stroke volume is the amount of blood pumped by the left ventricle?
Or the amount of blood pumped per ventricle.
Per ventricle, not left ventricle.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
We tend to think of it as being the left, but we've got to, we think of it as being the left, but we have to realize that it's the same for both.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, bear with me. So let's say, I'm gonna go back to the whiteboard one more time. Let's say that now Kayla, if she's like, hopefully she wasn't like me last night and she went to bed at like 1 in the morning just so she could be up at 8 the next morning. We're not going to do that. Let's say that Kayla, actually, let's say that she does that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Kayla now has a heart rate of, oh, I don't know. She has a heart rate of since she was up at 1, she went to bed at 1, she woke up at 7 for this class, and to pretend that she's not slipping into a coma, she's had like 3 cups of coffee, or in my case, 3 energy drinks already. And so her heart rate is like 112 beats per minute. But she's still at relaxed time. She's still relaxed. She's maybe driving in her car right now, but trying not to slip into a coma as she pays attention to class and drives at the same time. Not a really great idea, but this is what she's doing right now. And her cardiac output is still, because she's at rest, or trying to be, even though her heart rate is really high, her cardiac output is the same. She's not doing she's not doing anything differently than she was when it was here, and her activity wise. She's in her car, so her physical activity is pretty moderate, pretty mild. Her cardiac output is the same. Okay. Now, what is her stroke volume? How do we calculate that? Well,
There's
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I did the cardiac output divided by the heart rate, but I don't think that's right because I got a decimal.
I think you're right. Use cardiac output divided by heart rate.
Yeah.
Let me do it. Bear with me, because I think I honestly, I don't know the answer right off. I just made this up. Kayla, I know what your lifestyle is like, so I just made this up.
I got a decimal as well.
Well, and I think, bear with me, I've got to do the math too. So heart
Can we
rate,
round it?
what?
No, I'm gonna wait.
112 beats per minute. I think you can get a decimal. I don't think that's wrong, but I'm not sure. I think you can still get a decimal. Beats per minute. And then of course you invert this one to invert the units. Divided or 5,400 ml per minute. Oh, that isn't right. Cardi, I need to flip them. Paisley, shh, shh. Stop. She can hear people outside. It's very important to bark, even if they can't hear her. Stop. Divided. Paisley, stop. Don't. What was your answer, Kayla?
Hang on, let me get it back. Give me 1 second. Do you want me to round to like the nearest?
Well,
Do you
tell,
want me
tell me what it was first, and then I'll know that my math is right.
It was like 48.21.
21.
That's right. That's
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, that whole big decimal.
Yeah, I mean, just because it's a decimal, that's still right.
Okay. Because it was a decimal, I just didn't know if it could still be the stroke volume because I
You're
thought
right.
like
But you
stroke
can have,
volume.
you can have something in between a milliliter, right?
Yeah.
Milliliter? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now that makes sense. Okay.
I was like, you know, I didn't want to tell you you were right until I calculated it out myself.
Yeah, because you just don't want to give out the wrong information.
Exactly. Well, I'm trying not to. Yes. Are there, so if your cardiac output remains the same, your heart rate and your stroke volume are going to, they adjust. It's a lot easier to change your heart rate than it is your stroke volume. Well, let me see. Yeah, it's a lot easier to change your heart rate than your stroke volume because you can, your heart can start beating really, really fast. And your stroke volume is going down. Why would your stroke volume be going down?
Because it's not having time to like, I want to say like refill itself.
Oh yeah, yes, that's the right answer. Does that make sense, guys?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Now we'll come back. We're going to spend some time talking about this still, so bear with me here. Good job, Becky.
Thank you.
So stroke volume, if you remember from that part of the Wiggers diagram, is the end diastolic volume minus the end systolic volume. And so the stroke volume in this case, if the end diastolic is 130 ml and the end systolic volume is 70, the stroke volume is going to be 60. Remember, end diastolic is the very all the blood that's in the ventricles after when they've completely relaxed. And the end systolic is how much blood is left in the ventricles after the heart has completely contracted and all of the blood that it can possibly push up into the aorta has been pushed up or pushed out into the aorta. So the stroke volume, the end diastolic volume minus the end systolic volume. If thinking back about Kayla's heart and the fact that she had a lot of caffeine that day, what's changing that's making her stroke volume go down from what it was earlier? Hope this question is clear. What's changing? That she went from having a stroke volume of what, 70 to now having 48.2. What's changing that's decreasing her stroke volume here? Becky, what did you say earlier?
it's not having the time to like refill itself. Like it's
And
just
where,
beating.
and where would that be related to here?
The end systolic volume,
The hit, are you sure it's the end systolic volume?
the EDV.
The end diastolic, yes, that's right. Because if the heart doesn't have as much time to fill, there's not going to be as much blood in there at the end of filling, right?
Right.
And that's the end diastolic volume. Is this clear? Is this clear to people besides Becky?
Yes.
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 So regulators of cardiac output. What regulates heart rate? What regulates stroke volume? Heart rate, excuse me, is regulated by the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. Which one speeds up your heart, guys?
Sympathetic.
Say it one more time.
Sympathetic.
Sympathetic, correct. What one slows it down?
Parasympathetic.
Correct. The stroke volume is affected by the preload, the afterload, and the contractility. Preload is most affected by venous return, how much blood is moving into the right atria, because that's what's receiving all the blood from the different parts of the body, systemic circulation, right? Afterload, we'll talk about in 1 second. Contractility is how hard can the heart contract, which is affected by the sympathetic nervous system, and some preload. Actually, bear with me, it's independent of preload, and I'll explain that later. But the preload has to do with some of it because no, preload and contractility are separate things. But preload is how much blood can you fill the ventricle with, because, and that has to do with how much blood is moving into the atria, because then it pours down into the ventricles. Afterload is how much blood is in the arteries that the ventricle has to contract against in order to move more blood into the arteries. And contractility is how hard does the heart contract? And bear with me just for a second. We're going to go through each of these in more detail here. So as I just tried to give you rough definitions, here are the definitions. Preload is the volume of blood in the ventricles at the end of diastole. It is the amount that the ventricles are stretched by the contained blood before they contract. So that filling of how much blood are the ventricles filling with by the end of their optimal volume for how much they have in them. That's preload. There's an optimal length tension relationship. Remember this from muscle from last semester. That's needed for force generation. So significant overextension can lead to inefficient pumping. Remember, if the muscle's too stretched, then you're not going to get a good pumping reaction. We'll spend more time on that in a second here. Contractility is cardiac cell contractile force due to factors other than the preload, which is going to be the end diastolic volume. Afterload is the back pressure exerted by the blood in the large arteries leaving the heart, the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, and other arteries right next to the heart. So preload has a positive effect on stroke volume. If you can get more blood in the heart during filling, you get a better stroke volume. If you get a stronger contraction of the ventricles, then you get a better stroke volume. Get a higher stroke volume. If there's so much blood still left in the, what is here? If there's so much blood still left in the aorta and the pulmonary trunk, that you have to push more volume into a place that's already got a lot of volume in it, it's going to decrease your stroke volume. So bear with me here. So I told you preload is the degree of stretch. This relates to what's called the Frank-Starling law, which says that the degree of stretch before the cardiac muscle cells contract by venous return is a critical factor in controlling stroke volume. So how much stretch is there before from venous return as the ventricle fills has a positive effect on stroke volume. And it has the most positive effect. So here, all right, Jade, you're not gonna cry. It's not that hard. She's like, whatever. I'm looking at the chat comments that I only see like when I do this. All right, so here, this is my preload. This is my, let's say it's my right ventricle to make it easier. Here, all the blood comes in into the atria, goes into the ventricle. This is my preload. This is my end systolic volume, whatever's left in there. Now, what if I don't have a really great venous return? I don't have a really great venous return. See how my preloaded changes drastically? Here's me giving my right ventricle really good venous return. Really good venous return. This is my end systolic volume. So whatever left during that contraction is my stroke volume. Now here, I'm sitting here sedentary. It's the end of the day and I'm just vegging and my preload is not very high. Or I'm not giving my heart enough time to fill because my heartbeat is so fast, like Kayla's was. Do you see the difference? Somebody tell me yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. So remember what one thing that came out here is that if there's too overextension, it leads to inefficient pumping. This is not such a problem with the heart unless you're dealing with congestive heart failure. And your heart is atrophying to try to make up for it. So not atrophying, hypertrophy, going into hypertrophy to make up for it. Because on a normal, healthy individual, your heart works at less than the maximal length tension relationship. It's more, this is normal for your heart. Optimal would be right here, giving it a little bit more stretch, but this is where you normally are. With the myosin and the myosin and the actin overlapping. You remember that from last semester? When there's only minimal overlap, you don't get as good of contraction because of the overlap of the myosin and actin. When there's better overlap, you get better contraction. When this is where the heart normally functions. So we have some give when it comes to stretch before we've maximized our stretch. So factors that affect preload: a slow heartbeat and exercise. Exercise actually works to enhance your stroke volume, allowing you to lower your heart rate. But why would a slow heartbeat be good at enhancing your stroke volume?
Because it's taking longer and it is filling up more.
Right, exactly. It's giving your heart time to fill. And exercise through two major pumps, you have a abdominal pump, which is going to bring in the blood, and you have your skeletal muscle pumps, and they're both going to increase how much is coming back to the heart during exercise. Blood loss and an extremely rapid heartbeat is going to decrease stroke volume and decrease it significantly. If you have rapid blood loss, that's going to reduce how much blood is able to come back to the heart with each contraction, right? And the result is that you get a lower venous return, meaning you get a lower preload when you're bleeding out. So the volume of blood ejected by each ventricle in 1 minute is called what?
Is it E?
E? Yes, that's correct. Assume the left ventricle of a child's heart has an EDV, end diastolic volume of 90 ml, and an end systolic volume of 30 ml, 60 ml, and a cardiac output of 20 to 2,400 milliliters per minute. His stroke volume is what, and his heartbeat is what?
Well, the stroke volume would be 30.
Right?
It's A.
That's
It would have to be A.
right. Okay. You guys, we started at 8. Actually, let's do this, and then let's finish these questions, and then we'll stop after we've got these questions. Stroke volume is increased by what?
Could it be D?
Is it stroke volume? Why do you say that?
Let's see.
Who said C?
I did.
You're right.
C is in cat, right?
Yep, C is in
Yeah.
cat. Dehydration would actually bring it down. Because you're going to reduce preload by lowering the overall blood volume. So you're going to reduce venous, you're going to decrease venous return with dehydration. The Frank-Starling law says that the stroke volume is proportional to what?
Wait.
E.
B.
E?
B. B.
E is in Bravo, yes. Okay. All right, let's take 5 minutes here and get up and move around, and we'll come back and we'll finish the heart and start into the blood vessels. So take 5 minutes. My clock here says 9:32, so 9:37.
All right. Thank you.
You got a keyboard? What? Supposedly, yeah, they lied to you. Search and misled you. Big jokes. You could maybe try go rather than going into the phone, go into the computer, to see you. Did you get a new bed for, these, it's like, this, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, that's what it's. We could maybe, stitch the hole in it. You know what? Don't picture it. It's actually, I mean, don't put it on my bed. I don't need more hair. I don't need anything cluttering the house. Well, or you decide what you want to do with it. If you want to, we can wash it and give it and sew up that hole and give it away. And don't. You can wash it and sew up that. But I don't want you. I'm not taking time to do that. But you're not putting it on my back. Okay. Then it's going up in the back. Okay. Okay, these are the choices. Mama, I've got to get my clothes. I know I'm not. All right. So one way to quantify contractility. So remember, contractility is how hard is the heart contracting with each contraction. One way to quantify contractility is through the ejection fraction, which is defined as the ratio of the stroke volume to the end diastolic volume. So, okay, you guys, if you could, I'd love to have some cameras on. Thank you. It makes me not feel so much like I'm talking to myself. So, and ejection fraction.
Don't judge me. I look like Shrek.
I don't care. You don't look like Shrek. No, you don't. You don't look like Shrek, Richard. Okay. I could have said something mean, but I'm not going to.
It's okay.
I thought of something. I thought, Mary, don't say that one. All right.
It's okay. I literally just rolled out of bed.
It looks fine. So ejection fraction is how much is left in the heart after contraction. Or how much, yeah, is, bear with me. Ejection fraction is how much of the volume in the heart or in the ventricle is being pumped out with that heartbeat. So this is how much of that volume that just left is your stroke volume divided by the total that was in there initially. So if your stroke volume is 70 and your end diastolic volume was 100 ml, then your ejection fraction is 70%. Does that make sense? Under resting conditions, your ejection fraction normally is between 50 to 75%. Increased contractility will lead to increased ejection fraction. Now, rather than having only 70 ml in my stroke volume went up to 90. So now it's 90 over 100. So my ejection fraction is now 90%. Is this clear?
Yes.
So preload and afterload. Preload is the initial stretching of the myocytes prior to contraction. So this relates to ventricular filling. Afterload, in contrast, is the force or load against which the heart has to contract. So how much blood is in the arteries that the ventricles are having to push blood against that's already there. So what if I had another one? Here's my vessel coming out like this. And rather than being empty, it's full of blood still because I've got like some systemic edema or buildup that's not flowed out and gone out to other places. How hard is it going to be for me to contract this against the next one on top?
Harder.
Yeah, that's afterload. Because remember, we're always dealing with the fluid here, so it's dynamics. How much is that? The more I have to push up against it, the more I have to push up against it, the lower my stroke volume is going to be. So preload is related to ventricular stretch at the end of diastole. Afterload is the pressure that the chambers of the heart must generate in order to eject blood out of the heart. How much do they have to generate to be able to push against the blood that's still in the arteries right next to the heart? Factors affecting preload: venous pressure and the rate of venous blood pressure and the rate of venous return. Afterload affecting factors: systemic vascular resistance and pulmonary vascular resistance. Preload is going to be affect systolic volume during diastole. Afterload is going to affect it during systole, when the ventricles are having to contract against whatever blood is still in the arteries that they're trying to push blood into. Preload depends on ventricular filling. Afterload has to do with arterial blood pressure and vascular tone, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. Preload is a volume, afterload is a pressure. Extrinsic factors that affect stroke volume and thus cardiac output. Hormonal control. Thyroid hormones can increase the force of contraction. Think about your times when you've gotten stressed. Cortisol. or sympathetic innervation to ventricular muscle fibers. When norepinephrine binds to beta-1 receptors on the cardiac muscle cells. Sympathetic, all of a sudden you see the bear and your heart starts going. Contractility is the increase in the contractile strength. So how hard does a heart contract back? Like this one. Rather than having this, it goes, here's my preload. And then rather than just having it do this, it goes like this afterwards. So increased contractility results from increased sympathetic stimuli, certain hormones, and calcium. Remember, calcium is, if you increase the amount of calcium, you're going to increase the degree of muscle contraction. Because remember how that tends, we're talking about skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle. They both have to do with calcium is the major turn on off point, whether or not muscle contraction is going to occur, because it has to remove that troponin from the actin binding sites for the myosin. Sympathetic stimulation through the beta-1 receptor. So norepinephrine binds to a beta-1 receptor. It activates a G protein. The G protein causes ATP to be converted into cyclic AMP. Remember, cyclic AMP is a great second messenger system. And the cyclic AMP activates protein kinases that phosphorylate things, including the channel that's more channels that are going to allow calcium into the cell, muscle cell. The kinase is also going to activate and improve how much calcium is being released and taken up again by the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And it's going to increase how well myosin breaks down ATP and speeds that up. So it's working through 3 different pathways here, or 5 different pathways. 4 different pathways. Increasing how much calcium can come into the cell. Increasing how much calcium and how fast calcium can leave the sarcoplasmic reticulum. How quickly the myosin starts breaking down ATP, because remember, it has to break down that ATP every time it moves forward and shifts to the next binding site. And how quickly can you reuptake the calcium back in? And bring it back into the storage of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So if you increase the sympathetic nervous activity of the heart, you increase the stroke volume. You also can increase the heart rate by increasing the activation of the sinoatrial node. If you decrease the activity of the if you increase the amount of parasympathetic activity, it's going to slow down the SA node. if you decrease the amount of parasympathetic activity because the sympathetic activity is going up, it's going to increase the heart rate. And these 3 factors are going to increase cardiac output. Sympathetic stimulation also affects contractility from this up here. Increases contractility by allowing calcium in faster or taking it up faster. Because calcium is what really speeds up a contraction or allows it to be a little faster and be initiated faster. And if you can speed up the ATPase pump on the myosin, you're going to speed up how quickly the myosin can move to the next binding site. So the sympathetic nervous system through the beta 1 is going to increase the heart rate at the SA node. Parasympathetic, when the parasympathetic is firing on the SA node, it's going to decrease the heart rate. AV node increase the conduction rate through the AV node. Decrease the conduction rate, parasympathetic. Atrial muscle, sympathetic nervous system is going to increase the strength of contraction. Parasympathetic is going to decrease it. The sympathetic nervous system significantly impacts the strength of contraction of ventricular muscle, but has no effect on parasympathetic because there aren't a lot of muscarinic receptors for the parasympathetic nervous system or in the ventricle muscle. The heart is stimulated by the cardioacceleratory center in the medulla oblongata and decreased by the parasympathetic vagus nerve via the vagus nerve inhibitory center. So they're both dual innervating the heart, both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. They're both innervating. Sympathetic is going to speed it up. Parasympathetic is going to slow it down. And they're both coming from centers in the medulla oblongata. So cardioinhibitory centers in the blank receive input from where? Oh, we haven't talked about this. They receive input from well, actually, you do know the answer. Where are the cardio inhibitor centers? Guys, where are they?
In the heart?
Well, no, where are the look at this graph right here. Where's the cardio inhibitory centers?
In the sympathetic nervous system?
Nope. Look at this. Where's this?
Oh, that's the vertebrae. Oh, no, wait, medulla oblongata.
Oblongata.
Haha. It looks like a vertebrae, actually, like a
It
trans.
does,
section
but
of-
it's not. It does, you're right, it does. These are in the medulla oblongata. So cardio inhibitor centers in the
Medulla oblongata.
are going to receive input from the chemoreceptors in the aortic arch. And we'll talk about those receptors more in the next chapter. Parasympathetic nervous system is mediated by acetylcholine. You remember that the parasympathetic nervous system, the major neurotransmitter that we think about most when it comes to the parasympathetic nervous system is acetylcholine. So the parasympathetic nervous system innervates the SA node and the AV node, but not much in the ventricles because there's just not a lot of muscarinic receptors where the parasympathetic nervous system can act on the ventricles. However, the parasympathetic nervous system dominates autonomic stimulation, slowing down the heart rate. You guys, what was the heart rate of the SA node by itself? We knew it had an inherent autorhythmicity. What was it?
Is it 60 to 100 beats?
I think it, yeah, 60 or 100 heart, 70 or 100, was that it? So
I was thinking 70, yeah.
rarely do you get up to over, most people, I'm an exception, but most people get to less than 100, right? Most people have a resting heart rate less than 100. And a lot of times less than 70. Because the parasympathetic nervous system is dominating. If I quit drinking so much caffeine, it would help me not to have such a incredible heart rate. Almost ready to die. But SA node, parasympathetic nervous system, is it's gonna increase the permeability to potassium. What does that do to the ability to reach threshold if you increase the permeability to calcium? Or no, to pass potassium, not calcium, potassium. Increase the permeability to potassium. What does that do?
It would take longer to reach threshold.
Okay, Zena, you're drawing all over my thing. How did you do that? She says, I don't know. I don't know either.
There's
Zena,
a button at the bottom of the screen.
ah,
I'm sorry, I was trying to answer
All
the
right.
question and I pressed something.
you're officially fired. Oh,
I am so sorry.
all right. So increases the permeability to potassium. It's all right. It's just like, what is she doing? So increasing the permeability to potassium is going to make it harder to reach threshold, slowing down the autorhythmicity of the SA node. If you delay the opening of the sodium channels, you're also going to slow down how quickly, because remember, they're right here. You're going to slow down how quickly you reach threshold. Therefore, overall, you're going to decrease the rate of depolarizations. So with the rest of the heart, again, the parasympathetic nervous system is going to decrease the permeability of potassium, increase the permeability of potassium to potassium at the AV node. It's also going to decrease excitability, which is going to increase the nodal delay. What was the nodal delay?
filling of the ventricles.
Yeah, and why did it affected the filling of ventricles? What was it specifically? You're right. It's a filling of the ventricles. How quickly the nerve impulse moves from the AV node into the bundle branches. How quickly that conduction occurs. So you increase that, and what you do is like Rachel said, you allow give the heart more filling time by slowing down how quickly the ventricles are going to contract, by giving them more time in diastole. So the result is that that's also going to increase stroke volume because you're increasing preload. The atrial contractile cells are going to reduce the slow inward of calcium, slowing down how quickly things how quickly they contract. And the ventricles have little to no effect because we don't have any muscarinic receptors in the ventricles to be affected by the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system in contrast is going to decrease the permeability in the SI node to potassium, causing it to more easily reach threshold, have faster openings of those sodium funny channels, and therefore faster depolarizations. And it's the same as with the AV node. At the AV node, it's going to have the same effect. It's going to increase the permeability to potassium, decreasing the excitability. Or it actually should be increasing. I'm going to look at that again later. Should be increasing the excitability. Atrial and ventricular contractile cells, sympathetic nervous system, if you remember from up here, increases how much calcium can move into the cell, resulting in increased and faster contractions and harder contractions. Last part of this chapter, really briefly, ionotropic and chronotropic cardiac drugs. Bear with me just for a second. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. Ionotropic is a cardiac drug that affects cardiac contractions. A chronotropic drug is a cardiac drug that affects heart rate. Subcategories are positive and negative ionotropic. We have positive and negative chronotropic. So ionotropic affects cardiac contractions. Chronotropic, if you think chronological, and heart rate is measured as a factor of time, beats per time. So chronotropic is going to affect heart rate. And I can't get rid of these lines that Zena decided to draw on the thing, so we're stuck with them for right now. I don't know how you did that, but I can't get rid of them either.
It makes it more interesting to look at.
Darn it, Zena.
That's cool.
Okay, so functions, ionotropic drugs affects the contraction of the heart to increase or reduce. Chronotropic alters the heart rate to alters the heart rate. Different types of drugs, oh, I knew what this was right before a class. digoxin, or also called, I think it's also called digitalis, increases the contractions of the heart. Dopamine increases the heart rate. Or actually slows it down. Dopamine slows it down. Bear with me, I'm so sorry, slows it down. Yeah, slows it down. You guys, this is just a picture explaining how different chronotropic and ionotropic agents are going to influence the heart rate. And this is the end of the heart. Are there any questions? Let's move into the blood vessels. I don't think, famous last words, but I don't think the blood vessels are as complicated as the heart is. After we're done with the blood vessels, you will have your first exam. You're going to see, and I wanted to put them together. I wanted to put blood, the heart, and the blood vessels together. And that's why you haven't had an exam yet. But you'll see that the last part of the semester is going to start going a little faster. So your first exam is going to cover the blood and the immune system, the heart, and the blood vessels. Famous last words, but I want to start blood vessels today, finish it next week, and start the endocrine system. So this should not take us as long as it's taken us to get through the heart. So be patient with me here. So blood vessels and circulation. Talked a little bit about this in lab, which should make it a little easier to comprehend too. Vascular system is a closed system of vessels. It consists of arteries, which are often called resistance vessels because of how much muscle and elasticity they have in them, allowing them to resist major fluxes in flow. Arteries carry blood away from the heart to the tissues. Arterioles are smaller branches of arteries. Capillaries are smaller branches of arterioles. And they're the smallest of the vessels, which is where all exchanges are made with surrounding tissues. This is where the business of blood and the whole reason we have blood and why we need blood is because of what goes on in the capillaries. It's where all the business really of blood occurs. Venules are formed when capillaries rejoin, the merging of capillaries. And venules return the blood to the heart via the veins. So veins are formed when venules merge. We have systemic circulation and pulmonary circulation. Remember, pulmonary circulation is moving out to the The arteries are carrying deoxygenated blood, oxygen poor blood, out to the lungs, and the veins are bringing it back, the pulmonary veins. The aorta is taking blood out to the body, the systemic tissues, and then bringing it back via the veins. So here's our arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, bringing it back to the heart. So histology-wise and features of blood vessels. Arteries, we have probably several hundred. They're thick, highly elastic, and have large radii. They're the passageway from the heart to the organs and the pressure reservoir. Excuse me. Arterioles, we have about 500,000. And they're highly muscular. They're what vasoconstrict and dilate. And they are the primary resistance vessels, with determining the distribution of the cardiac output based on where the blood goes. You only have 5 liters of blood approximately. And the whole total volume of your body is much more than 5 liters. Therefore, we have to decide where is the blood most needed at any given moment. That's what the arterioles do. Is they determine where we need the blood at any given moment most. And making sure that it gets there by whether they dilate or constrict. Capillaries, you have about 10 billion. They're very thin-walled, with a large total cross-section of all the capillaries you have. And they're the site of exchange, where we distribute between the extracellular fluid and the plasma and the interstitial fluid, the nutrients and the waste. The veins, you have several hundred. They're thin-walled, highly distensible, don't have as much elasticity to them, giving them a chance to be not as much muscle, allowing them to be a lot more extensible. They're the passageway to the heart from the organs or the blood reservoir. With the thickness of the walls, remember there's that tunica externa or tunica adventitia, which is the most outer layer. Remember this from lab a couple weeks ago. Elastin fibers. Smooth muscle tends to be very thick in the arteries. Another row of elastin fibers, and then the endothelium. Arterial tends to have more muscle in comparison to the tunica externa, because this is where we have to have the major amounts of vasoconstriction and vasodilation. And then the endothelium in the center. Capillaries, just endothelium. This layer is the only layer, that tunica interna is the only layer found in capillaries. In veins, connective tissue, tunica externa is the biggest layer. Muscles are almost equal. And then endothelium and valves. We don't see valves in any of the other vessels, but we have valves in veins. We look at the total distribution of blood. The majority of the blood is found in the veins. 9% of your 5 liters of blood, of your cardiac output, is going into your pulmonary circuit. In your heart, about 7% is of your cardiac output. %15 is going into the arteries. 5% is in the capillaries. And the majority of it is in the veins. Do you remember how I told you that you could tell the difference really easily of a vein and an artery and a cadaver? The veins are always filled with blood. The arteries are not. Because the blood pool is going to pool in the veins.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear well. Can you say that again, please?
It's really the easiest way to deter when you're looking at a cadaver or looking at artery versus, well, yeah, it has to be in a cadaver. When you're looking at a cadaver or a pig or any dead animal, the easiest way to tell the difference between an artery and a vein is the veins are always filled with blood because the blood pools in the veins. The arteries actually look hollow.
Look hollow. Okay.
So we have, zoom out just a little bit. We have large conducting arteries. A bit thick tunica externa, thinner tunica, thick tunica media, and a thin tunica interna. Around the arteries in the tunica adventitia and smooth muscle, you're going to have vasa vasorum, which are the blood vessels of the vessels. The tunica interna is composed of the endothelium and the basement membrane. Tunica externa in the distributing arteries. These are the muscular, wait, bear with me. These are the elastic arteries. These are the muscular arteries. So to large conducting or large arteries, muscular arteries. Actually, no, wait, I'm so sorry. I mix myself up. Conducting arteries are your elastic arteries, have a lot of elasticity to them. Is that right? Yeah, it is. Distributing arteries also have a lot of elasticity to
Excuse
them,
me.
or muscle. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I started writing something else. Do you mind repeating what you said about the conducting arteries?
Conducting arteries tend to have more elasticity to them and more muscle.
Got it. Thank you.
The distributing arteries tend to have muscle, but excuse me, more muscle and less elasticity. Arterioles tend to have very little elasticity, but lots of muscle. capillaries are just the tunica interna. They just have the endothelium in the basement membrane that makes up the tunica interna of all the other vessels. Venules don't have a lot of muscle. They have more, you'll see with the veins, they don't tend to have a lot of muscle in comparison to the tunica externa. They don't need it. But they need to be able to stay open, and they do that by connecting the tunica externa to the surrounding tissues. So they tend to have a higher tunica externa, less smooth muscle, so less tunica media. And as you get further away from the heart, the lumen inside the vessel increases drastically. We'll talk about why that's the case next week. So here's next to one another. This is the same picture that you had from lab. It's really easy to tell the difference in a cross-section of an artery and a vein because arteries maintain their shape. They maintain this circular structure. Veins do not, because they don't have as much muscle. They have a thicker tunica externa than arteries, but a thinner tunica media than arteries. Veins also have a bigger lumen, the inside, than arteries. One thing that's always interesting is an aneurysm. So this is a picture from your book. An aneurysm is a weak point in an artery or the heart wall. It forms a thin-walled bulging sac that pushes with each beat of the heart, which pulsates with each beat of the heart. So you've seen, I try when I'm taking care of my, bear with me here. I can tell you, I only buy balloons for anatomy classes. So, and physiology classes. You've seen in balloons where there's a weak spot and it kind of like bubbles out with other balloons. I try to keep my balloons in like an airtight container or airtight bag in between when I'm going to use them for class, because there's bacteria in there that eat away the latex. And so sometimes you'll see on balloons, I used to work in a balloon store, and you'll see on balloons that there's a bubbling out. And you just know that that balloon's going to burst on you, and probably even, and as luck would have it, probably right in your face. That would be what an aneurysm would be like in a blood vessel. And, you know, and I even worked in that balloon store after I learned about anatomy. So I used to, when I'd see that on balloons, I would know that that balloon had an aneurysm, because it was just waiting to blow up in my face. But so it forms this thin-walled bulging sac that pulsates with each beat of the heart. It can rupture, resulting in a hemorrhage or And if it's in the brain, it's a hemorrhagic stroke. This is kind of a neat one. If you look at this, this is a aneurysm of the an internal carotid artery. This is right before it moves into the circle of Willis, that cerebral arterial circle. This is before repair. This is after it's been repaired. So people like to say someone died of an aneurysm. You don't die of an aneurysm. You die when it hemorrhages and when it ruptures. There's many people who live with aneurysms and many of which are never diagnosed. It's kind of neat when you're looking at a cadaver and you find one. So anastomosis. Anastomosis meaning to come together. Is a point of convergence between two blood vessels other than capillaries. An arteriovenosus anastomosis is when the blood flows directly from an artery right here into a vein bypassing any capillaries. This is an arteriovenosus anastomosis. A venous anastomosis is where one vein drains into another vein. An arterial anastomosis is when two arteries merge, providing alternative routes to supply a tissue. Let me show you the most popular one of these. Bear with me. So this merging, this is okay. So here's the vertebral arteries coming together to form the basilar artery. Basilar artery branches off, comes together with the internal carotid artery. Basilar artery branching off, becoming the posterior cerebral arteries. Posterior communicating arteries coming up here. This is actually, I think this is a picture of a cadaver. It looks like a picture of a cadaver with some coloring to it, maybe. Maybe not, I don't know. But internal carotid artery and the middle cerebral artery. I thought, There it is. Arteries are sometimes called the blank of the cardiovascular system because they have strong, resilient tissue structure.
A.
It's A, correct, resistance. Which of the following, you guys remember back to this right here. This is showing you the regular pattern, arteries to capillaries to veins, or arteries to veins. Which of the following is not a possible circulatory route from the heart?
I think it's C.
See? Heart, arteries, capillary bed. How many of you agree with him? Is there anyone who disagrees with him? I agree with you, Martin. That's the right answer. That's the only one that can't be, because arteries don't lead back to the heart. Veins do. Good job. Which vessel has the thickest tunica media?
I think this one is C again.
I think it's C, large arteries. Yes.
Yeah.
Where is the greatest volume of blood found within the body?
D.
D, veins. Yep. So arteries, stay with me for just 5 more minutes or so. Arteries are specialized to serve as a rapid transit passageways for blood from the heart to organs. Due to their large radius, arteries offer little resistance to blood flow. They act as a pressure reservoir to provide the driving force for blood when the heart is relaxing. So here, my mouth is my ventricle here. Oh, that didn't work very well. That was terrible. All right, just a sec. So that blood just went into my aorta, my blue aorta here. And there's a lot of elasticity to that artery. And so the next thing it's going to do is it's going to go and push it down. It's going to expand with the pressure of the aorta, I assume with the pressure coming in of the blood from the ventricles. And then it's going to recoil and push it down further. Does that make sense? So they act as a pressure reservoir to provide a driving force. When they contract down, when they clamp down on the blood that's coming in, that pushes the blood forward. So arterial connective tissue also contains collagen fibers that provide a tensile strength, and elastin fibers that provide elasticity. They serve as a pressure reservoir, heart contracting and emptying. So they go up, and then this is elastic, and so it immediately pushes down on it and pushes it forward. So it's the blood. So the reason this is important right here is because it's not just the heart's contraction that's putting the force behind blood. We've got miles and miles of vessels. Or even if we want to not say miles, let's say meters and meters and meters of vessels. They can't be the only one, the heart can't be the only one putting a propulsion behind a pressure push to get the blood through the vessel. It's also the fact that the arteries, they're elastic and then they clamp down. They expand with the increased pressure volume and then they push down, pushing it further down. Three major type of arteries: elastic arteries, your conducting arteries, and more elasticity, thicker tunica media. These are your larger arteries. These are like your brachiocephalic artery, your aorta, your common carotid, your left subclavian. Muscular arteries, your radial artery, your ulnar artery, your popliteal artery. Arterioles, lots of muscle, but a thinner tunica externa in comparison, because this is where the vasoconstriction and the vasodilation is going to occur. So elastic arteries are thick-walled arteries near the heart. Include the aorta and its major branches. The large lumen allows for low resistance conduction of blood. And there's elastin in all three tunics, which is going to withstand and smooth out the large blood pressure fluctuations and allow blood to flow fairly continuously through the heart body. You guys, I think that's a good spot to end. We will finish the endocrine system. There's a lot of information, but it's not hard comprehension. So we will do the endocrine system in lab. And if I get a chance, I'll spend some more time going through more of lecture material. But we'll come back to right here. One thing that you might want to recognize that these arterial sense organs that are going to be involved in regulating the heart diameter are found in these in these elastin arteries right around the heart. And I will see you in about an hour and 20 minutes.
Alrighty, thank you.
Alrighty.
Thank you for being a great
There you
class.
go.
I have a question.
Go for it.
For AMP1 and for AMP1, I didn't realize until you sent that message yesterday, that email saying to do what is it, the lab 10, is that like 7, 8, 9, which is like one, I guess, was due. I was like, oh my goodness.
Give me 1 second here.
Okay.